My name is Andy Winter, and I'm a principal at Mobius Executive Leadership, and am running a track with my dear friend and colleague and mentor, Paul Dunyan, on the power of being internally referenced. And and I have the great pleasure of introducing David Rock to you this evening. David is a pioneer in bringing neuroscience to the world of leadership. He is the co-founder and CEO of the NeuroLeadership Institute, which is a global science consultancy that has advised over 2/3 of Fortune 500 companies. This institute has operations in more than 20 countries, and his organization brings together neuroscientists and leadership experts to make organizations better for humans through science. They are considered the world leaders in science-based, data-driven behavior change at scale. In 2006, David coined the term NeuroLeadership, and since then, his research and frameworks have reshaped how leaders think about motivation, performance, inclusion, and culture. The Institute has has launched major ideas now used worldwide, and I'm sure some of you know some of these, from the SCARF model of social motivation to the SEEDS model for reducing bias, and he has helped tech giants like Microsoft, Intel, and IBM to transform their cultures. We were having a lovely conversation just beforehand, and David was saying to me that he's always looking to learn, and one of the reasons he loves to come to the NPI, the Next Practice Institute, is to just hear different perspectives and wisdom from various points of view that he often doesn't get access to in his very focused way of looking at the world. David is a musician, plays the guitar and the drums and the piano, and also writes music. And of course, behind that and the work that he does, it's all about scanning for and noticing patterns that sometimes we miss. As you'll hear in a moment, he's from Australia and now based in the United States, so nice to have our joint Commonwealth in common. He holds a professional doctorate in the neuroscience of leadership from Middlesex University in London. And today, he'll be sharing with us the following: how understanding the brain can make us better leaders. And also he'll give a glimpse into ideas from his upcoming new book, Good with Humans. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to David Rock.
Thank you very much. It's really a privilege and an honor to be here with you. And as I was saying to Andy, it's I wanted to come to kind of challenge myself, hear other perspectives. I get very focused on one perspective, which I'm going to focus you all on for the next hour, which is the brain and leadership. And it's something I've been obsessed about for a very long time. Big thanks to Amy and the rest of the team for inviting me here. And as an Australian, I have a dilemma, though. I'm like between you and a drink. And so I'm like, do I want to talk or I just want to send you out? I'm not sure, but we'll see. But you're going to discover some terrible humor that mostly only Commonwealth people will laugh at, and the rest of you will wonder what's wrong with me. But I do definitely like to make light of things, as you'll see. And especially when you're talking at 5 o'clock about the most complicated thing in the universe, which is the human brain, and a very close second, which is making high-status people care about other humans more, which all of you are, I'm sure, challenged by all the time, right? How do you make high-status people care more about humans and systems and longer term and all sorts of things? How do you kind of work their brain? So I thought long and hard about this session, and one of the things that I know is all of you are in my place often, right? And the worst thing is when you're listening to someone, you can tell they've said it like 10, 100, 1,000 times over. You know that feeling when you go to a conference, you're like, oh my God, I'm so excited to hear this talk, but this person is just delivering something canned. And I don't have something canned. In fact, I have 0 slides, which I thought would be really fun. So I'm going to challenge myself to actually tell you a bit of a story and then leave lots of time, not 15 minutes, but more like half an hour, to actually have a really good debate with you about kind of the bigger questions, the deeper questions, the philosophical questions, whatever you'd like. So I sort of have a rough outline. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of why I got obsessed in this and how it kind of began. It's been a 26-year journey, literally, running this, doing this research, doing this work. That's how old I am. I'm going to talk to you about what we've studied. Cliff note, over 60 academic research papers, serious research, and more than a few hundred other thought pieces. But 60 like real research pieces, peer-reviewed academic research, building a foundation for thinking about leadership in the brain. So we'll talk about kind of what we studied roughly, and then we'll spend a lot of time, most of the time hopefully, on how like understanding the brain actually helps both leaders and leadership development, right? Because many of you, I'm sure, are involved in both, coaching leaders, but also developing leadership development, that kind of work. So we'll talk about kind of how it helps, and then I'll spend quite a bit of time on 3 recurring themes that come up in the neuroscience that just are like the biggest quirks of the brain when it comes to leadership. And I think hopefully it'll help you connect some things. Talk a little bit about what's next, and then we'll have a discussion as well. Just get this phone out of the way. All right, very good. So a little bit of a story. It's always uncomfortable thinking about telling a story because you don't want to go too far, you want to go too light, I don't want to tell you my entire life story. But I moved to the States 15 years ago, Australian originally, born in Sydney, and was spending a lot of time back and forward until I kind of finally made the move to New York largely. But if you sort of knew me a long time ago, you would see I was just an extremely curious child. I just always wanted to know how everything worked. Much to my dad's consternation, I took everything apart that I could get my hands on to try to understand it. He'd come home and find a broken television and a taken apart stereo, and sometimes I'd try to put them back together in new ways and fuse the house. That was always exciting. But I always wanted to understand how things worked, and I had this wonderful mother in particular who just fed my desire for learning and never said you can't ask that question, and just said keep asking questions, and so for some reason I did. And when I turned somehow when I turned about 15 years old, just before 15, I came across personal development and got really fascinated by mindfulness meditation and like observing myself, and really like obsessed with my own mind. And did years. Some of you know Gita Bellin. Any of you know Gita? Oh, look at that. Okay, we're amongst friends. So I did work with Gita 40 years ago. And the organization she set up in Australia, went really deep into that work initially, and then deep into several other organizations, and was just really fascinated by the insights. And for me as a teenager, like the impact on my life, my experience, my learning, and my day-to-day of doing transformational work was just amazing. It was very, very, very hard to imagine like going to university after kind of doing 3 or 4 years of that work, so I just didn't. I went and started my own businesses and started kind of working, went off into the world, failed dismally, was successful, failed again, was successful, like worked out how to run businesses, and came back to personal development around 30 and realized like my real passion was helping people and going back to that transformational work. And very long story short, sorry, we'll pick up the pace a little, but I took a year sabbatical to think about what was next. And what I found is while I was thinking about what was next, I was just accidentally starting to coach people. This was like 1996, 97. And I was kind of combining my experiences in business with the personal development I'd done, and just started coaching over coffee. And it went from a few friends to a lot more friends, to kind of structuring it to a whole bunch of people saying, you have to teach us how to do this because you're having way more fun than we are, and I want to be coaches. So 1998, I set up the first coaching program in Australia. It was the first one kind of there. It was the early days. But we did something very different. Having a scientific brain that likes to ask questions, I didn't look at anything else that was happening. We got a group together, a study group, for a year, and we basically tried coaching each other and watching what happened when it worked, and watching like the pathways that conversations took, in particular when it didn't work. And it became so clear that most of the ways people coached just didn't work. It was about their own brain, and that it was really hard to find that moment where you actually were helpful. It was really hard. But we spent a year literally meeting for a whole day every week while I was on sabbatical, researching somehow. I spent a whole year like unpacking like what's the most effective path to really being helpful to someone who's stuck, right? Just that question. And I turned that into a coaching program that we still run every year. We've had about 25,000 graduates now. And over several years, what became really, really clear was there was an active mechanism in successful coaching. And that active mechanism was very, very observable. You could have like a stopwatch going and someone could press a button when coaching actually kicked in, right? It was chat, conversation, niceties, sorts of stuff, and then something just changed, right? It was a very, very clear moment in time when something changed and like coaching started working. Anyone guess what that moment was? What happened in that moment? It was a moment of insight, and you could actually see it on someone's face, right? You could see people's whole face changing. You could see their energy changing, and like that person before and after that moment was just a different human. And I got really obsessed by this question of why is insight so powerful? Where does it come from? What goes on? And this set me on a path. I ended up coming to the States a lot, building a coaching program that mirrored mine at NYU. I built the first coaching programs at NYU. That got me really obsessed with the academic side of insight and started reaching out to all the scientists working on this space. And cut a long story short, started to write a textbook on coaching and the brain, wrote Your Brain at Work, started interviewing hundreds of scientists. And 2007, we ran the first conference on the neuroscience of leadership. And at the time I ran this conference because I wanted to get all these scientists together that I'd been speaking with. So I was working with like Mark Beeman, who understood insight and the brain. I was working with people in all these different kind of aspects of neuroscience and studying them. And I wanted to get them together and kind of see what would happen. And we ran this conference in Europe as sort of an experiment. And one of the things with experiments is they can go wrong. And it was like the worst idea I've ever had, trying to get scientists to talk to each other, because they absolutely hated each other, and all they did was argue, and there was no like synthesis whatsoever. There was just, and we looked at that and we said, wow, let's never do that again. And we accidentally did the next year, but changed the whole concept. And then the next year and the next year and the next year. And we've actually run this conference since 2007. There's one coming up this year, virtual. But we've been running this, and what we realized is that scientists don't really want to speak to each other and find patterns, right? They want to just focus on their area. And that no one was asking organizational questions like, how do you increase innovation in a company? And synthesizing all the neuroscience research. And so we said, well, let's do that. So that's what we started doing. In 2008, we started publishing a journal. And this journal, we started kind of thinking about leadership and the brain. And the switch that I made from coaching to leadership was kind of accidental, but I wrote a paper called The Neuroscience of Leadership, which started the whole field. And Art Kleiner, who was then the strategy and business editor, some of you know Art, I'm sure. Art Kleiner said, this isn't the neuroscience of coaching, this is the neuroscience of leadership. And the basic hypothesis was that insight changes the brain, so leaders need to create insights in others. And we kind of walked through that. Anyway, getting a bit deep. But what happened was we started a journal. We started working with scientists to publish foundational pieces on the brain and leadership. And what this started was this question way back in 2006, 2007. We started asking this question: could we build a whole language for leadership and leadership development, where everything came back to how the brain worked? Could we build a language for leadership like that? And we kind of set off to do this. We had no commercial model for commercializing that for like 15 years. So we were just kind of studying it, writing papers. SCARF came out in 2008. But we kept asking, can we sort of synthesize everything? And in the end, as I said, we published about 70 papers. And we have built now this kind of whole language for developing leaders and doing leadership development. And so that's kind of been the journey. Without getting into the commercial stuff, we ended up kind of working out a commercial model in 2015. And a lot of that's about scale. So we do very little one-to-one coaching. We do very little top team development. What we do is a company wants to change the whole organization's culture in some way. We'll define leadership there, like we did at Microsoft, and then develop those leaders by teaching them all about the brain and leadership. And the reason now, to get to my second point of how it helps, the reason that actually helps is that you're dealing with high status people trying to make them more self-aware. You're dealing with high status people who are all academically trained, right? They're lawyers, doctors, accountants, engineers, or MBAs, all of them, right? Pretty much without exception. What that has in common is, when you think about it, academia, right? Let's be thorough. I want to see the evidence. They've been taught to be, really, really, cautious. And they've also been taught that, the human stuff is messy and should be kind of parked, right? And let's just focus on the results and the numbers. And it's actually really interesting. There's a network in the brain for thinking about concepts and goals. Same network. This switches off when you think about people. And when you think about people, it switches this one off. They're in a seesaw. Thinking about people, thinking about goals and concepts are in a bit of a seesaw. So we hire people very goal-focused, very conceptual, that haven't spent much time in their people networks, don't feel very safe spending time in those people networks, right? And these are not people who just like throw dinner parties and everyone loves them. These are the opposite. These are the people who are always busy, doing the next thing. Whereas the people who throw dinner parties and just have lots of friends, they've got big people networks, right? But maybe they're not so focused. They often haven't got their lives together. They're often struggling financially or other things because they're not goal-focused, right? So there's a sort of balance between these two. And what we saw is that we want to create people focus in people who are really goal-focused. The more you use something tangible, like neuroscience, at a certain level of neuroscience that's digestible, the more you use something tangible, the easier it is for them to literally hold it in mind. And it turns out if people can't hold something in mind, if they can't activate a concept in their working memory, visual working memory, if they can't see what you're saying, they cannot connect it to any experience. So the first challenge with leadership is just like getting people to hold an idea in mind. And the more concrete that idea is, the more it's like connected to something in the physical universe, the easier it is for them to hold that in mind and then connect to other things. And I'll get to in a minute kind of why that's so important. But what we found is it's so incredibly helpful talking about really soft conceptual things through the lens of what's happening in the brain, although you can definitely get too complicated and you can also get too simple. So you've got to get it, there's sort of a Goldilocks, thing as well. And you've got to be ready for complicated answers. So you actually have to understand the whole thing, not just kind of give them a simple response. So anyway, it helps that way. The second thing that we found is that you end up designing really different kinds of interventions when you understand the brain. Because we did a lot of research on the brain and learning, so how you actually make learning stick, how you create insights, how you make the insights stick, how change happens, all this kind of other stuff. And we ended up experimenting with really different kinds of learning strategies. So understanding the brain makes you kind of deliver different kinds of learning and basically helps people kind of connect to what you're saying, particularly high status individuals. So those are a couple of things. So what did we study over that time? Just quickly, like the first decade or so was like the foundational things. So what is threat and reward in the brain, and the SCARF model, as you saw. How do people understand each other? What's motivation? So a lot of foundational things. In the last decade, it's been more starting with organizational questions. So what's the neuroscience of accountability, for example? Like people who are good at accountability, what are the actual, cognitive habits of that? What are the cognitive habits of people good at psychological safety? What are the cognitive habits of people good at growth mindset, for example? So for the last decade or so, we've been kind of starting with organizational challenges and saying, okay, what's the cognitive science of this challenge so we can get better at embedding this at scale? Anyway, that's the backstory. So 3 recurring themes. I'll take a sip of some tea. 3 recurring themes. The first theme, and these are really connected, it's a bit of a Venn diagram. The first theme is that the human brain is really challenged when it comes to just new information and just processing the world, right? Let's do a little experiment on this. I'm going to call out a question, you call out an answer. They're going to be very complicated questions. What's 2 plus 2? Let's get everyone. 4 plus 4? 8 plus 8? 10 plus 10? 20 plus 20? 56 plus 79? Why is that funny? You did all the others immediately without any work. What about 56 multiplied by 79? Forget about it, right? It's just a head shake, right? First one was funny. The second one was terrifying. So really interesting that I can, trip up a room of very, very intelligent and even motivated people, even though it's 5 o'clock. I can trip up a room at adding 4 digits. And by the way, this is why AI exists, because we can barely add up 4 digits, right, in our heads without having to stop everything else You could do it. It would take you about 10 seconds. You'd have to activate your visual cortex, right? There's a series of steps, and you do it. But it's effort. And as Daniel Kahneman said, thinking is aversive. We react to the opportunity to think like we react to the opportunity to do a push-up. It's like, do I have to? Can I avoid it somehow? Can I cut and paste someone else's push-up here? I don't know. So basically, we've got this really big and undiscussed, non-disclosed issue with our capacity to process. So we have really big capacity issues. Most people go through their whole lives embarrassed at how little they can remember and how little they can recall and process, right? So we've been told we have this incredible capacity that you're hardly using. We all feel really guilty. No, our working memory, which is the gate for understanding new things, is really, really limited. And the AI revolution is profound if we can use it right. We can do incredible things if we use it right. But guess which part of the brain you need to use AI right? It's the part that can barely add up 4 digits. So it's a little problematic. It's going to be an interesting time. So the first theme that we see over and over is that we've got limited capacity to process the world. Now, how the brain compensates for that? When something's really difficult, something's really complicated, like a question with 4 variables, you just can't process that with your prefrontal. What the brain does is it activates deeper networks to problem solve. And it starts this Boolean search of everything you've ever thought, every book you've ever read, every problem you've ever solved, every conversation you've ever had. It's all in there. Starts searching through and finds a solution to a complex question, right? And unfortunately, the answer is in maybe dozens or hundreds of neurons speaking to each other in a network you haven't used for a while. Everyday thought might be 1 billion neurons. And so you don't sense the signal above the noise until you quiet your brain down a lot, right? And this is why when we hit a difficult problem, we have the answer in the shower as we're waking up, as we're exercising, and not when we're actually trying to solve it, right? So actually trying to solve a problem creates noise in your brain. And when your prefrontal hasn't been able to solve something, it's the deeper brain networks that actually solve it. And anything that quietens the brain actually helps with this. So this sort of first theme is you've got to maximize conscious processing by chunking, simplifying, see things in front of you rather than holding them, all that good stuff that you're all, I'm sure, very good at. But you also want to leave a lot of space for non-conscious processing. So we ended up writing 3 papers on the neuroscience of insight, basically where they come from and how to have more of them, why they matter, and how to measure them. So we've got a really cool measure for the strength of insight. So insight and sort of is the way around this limited capacity. When you find yourself trying to solve a problem 3 or 4 times and failing, that's a huge marker. Go take a nap. Come back to it. Do something else. Do something pleasant, because your brain needs to be in a pleasant kind of state. So anyway, the third thing to know about this limited capacity is that because we can barely add up 4 digits, massive amounts of what we do are unconscious. And what that means is heavily biased. Massive amounts of what we do are just previous experience rehashed. In fact, this capacity, it's prefrontal up here, this capacity called working memory or the mental sketch pad, or this capacity here, if you looked at how much you can process, say, per minute in this versus how much is processed unconsciously in that same minute, it's about a cubic foot to the Milky Way. It's an insane difference, right? And so what happens is just about everything we're doing is happening in the unconscious, which means massive, massive, massive amounts of bias. So you want to understand this, and actually, even sometimes our insights are really biased. We got to check. So that's all in the kind of bucket of limited capacity, right? We've got limited capacity to process, so we actually need more insights, and we have to be careful of the biases that come out because they really do get in the way. So that's one kind of broad issue that is a very, very, very big recurring theme. The second big recurring theme after limited capacity is limited self-regulation. And this is something we wrote about in 2009 in the second paper, and many, many times since. The brain has many accelerators, so movement, thought, emotion, action, all sorts of things, right? You think of these as like momentum. There's actually only one network in the brain for inhibiting thoughts, movements, actions, processes. It's called the brain's braking system informally. It's basically built out of that part of the brain that can barely add up 4 digits, I'm sorry to tell you. It's built out of the prefrontal. It's the right and left ventrolateral prefrontal. There will be a pop quiz on that over dinner. So this braking system, unfortunately, really does like tire with use. Much harder to like not get upset about something I say right now than it would be this morning, because you've been using this a lot, right? So this capacity to like inhibit emotions, inhibit bad things you're going to say, inhibit things you're going to do. This capacity is quite limited, and it's in a seesaw with the prefrontal, right? So it's not in a seesaw with prefrontal. So it's in a seesaw with the limbic system, which is your emotional center. So it's part of the prefrontal, it's in a seesaw. So in other words, the more emotions you're feeling, the worse your capacity to add up 4 digits and control emotions, right? Or thoughts or actions. And they're in a very clear seesaw. It's not 100%, 1-to-1 ratio, but it's very, very, strong seesaw like that. And this explains a massive amount of the work that you do, right? We need to help leaders, calm their emotions. We need to help leaders quiet down their brain. All of that is so you get more prefrontal and more insight. In fact, insight is affected even more than general processing by threat response. It's a huge thing. So the second big challenge we have is basically limited self-regulation. And the more that we have to think about, the more tired, overwhelmed our brain is, the worse that self-regulation is. And the stronger our emotions, the worse that self-regulation is. So we were able to develop kind of a 3-layer focus of threat response. So level 1, level 2, level 3 threat, just to have some easy to use, easy to recall language about threat, to be able to kind of see it and share that language. That's the kind of thing that we scale. The third thing, so first one, limited capacity to just process. Second one, limited self-regulation. Third one, limited social cognition. In English, limited ability to understand that other people are different to you and what they might actually be feeling. And guess what? The more you have to think about, the more your prefrontal is tired, the worse that gets. And the more emotions you're feeling, like the worse regulated you are, the worse that social cognition is as well. So social cognition in particular is understanding 2 things, people's motivations and their goals. So kind of why they're doing what they're doing and where they want to get to. And one of the quirky things about the human brain is we assume everyone is us. It's kind of true. But we assume that everyone's motivated by what we're motivated by. And unless you actually put in effort, more than adding up 4 digits, unless you really put in effort, you just automatically assume that people feel what you do, understand what you understand, know exactly what you just said and why, and they just completely don't. We think that people understand us about 80 to 90% of the time. It's like 50%, and that's for simple things. So social cognition, like really understanding people's motivations and their goals, is really, really hard. And where the SCARF model came from was between about the year 2000 and 2003, so over about 3 and a bit years. What I was seeing was literally hundreds of studies just starting to come out at the birth of the social cognitive neuroscience field. Hundreds of studies started to come out about threat and reward. So the brain is always monitoring potential threats to stay away from, rewards to go towards. It was basically saying that this pleasure and pain system, so the threat reward system is literally a pleasure and pain system, was being kind of reused or recycled for social things that didn't make any sense. And there were hundreds of studies basically saying that we've misunderstood how important things like fairness are to the human brain. It activates a disgust system in the brain, literally like tasting something disgusting. We recoil automatically. There's no kind of way to stop it. So a lot of these social emotions were much stronger in the brain than anyone realized. It took me 3 years to find the pattern. I love finding patterns. And eventually we were able to put the SCARF model together. That what it does is it gives particularly high status people with busy brains a scaffolding to be able to more simply detect what's going on in other people's brains, particularly at scale. And how many of you have used the SCARF model before? You've in some way or other. Okay, amazing. So the rest of you are saying, what's he talking about? SCARF? Is that better? SCARF? SCARF, status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And what I found is that, we published it in 2008, is it describes what human brains are doing when they interact. So it's the neuroscience of motivation, engagement, psychological safety, belonging, inclusion, and about half a dozen other things like conflict and team building, all this stuff. So it just explains what happens when humans interact and what their brains are doing. And the new book I'm working on called Good with Humans basically is a walk through all of SCARF, how to understand yourself through the lens, how to have better conversations through it, how to deal with harder conversations, how to drive change through it, sort of that whole thing. That's what I'm working on. But what SCARF does is it makes people who are not great at social cognition better at it by going, oh, hang on, if I write it that way, I'm going to create a status threat. I can see it. Right? Oh, if I say that, I'm going to create an autonomy threat, right? And so ideally, ahead of time, leaders get smarter about not creating threats before they happen, or in real time, they're able to see what they did accidentally, and rather than react and start a spiral down, they can go, oops, I just created all 5 threats. When I walked in and took over that meeting, let me clean that up and sort that out. So it makes them better at social cognition. Guess what being better at social cognition does is it helps you with capacity issues and regulation issues. And the better you are at regulating your emotions, the better you are with capacity and social cognition. So these 3 are kind of linked. And what I see when I talk to leaders and hear about their leadership challenges is it's basically one of these 3 things. That they're just not able to process what's going on. They're not able to manage emotions, or they're not really able to understand people. Like, I just don't understand my people. Why are they reacting like this? SCARF explains that a lot. All right, so that's a good start. Now I want to have a bit more fun and take some questions. But I'm actually going to take 3 questions at once and see if I can kind of weave an answer that weaves all 3. And because I like to challenge myself, right? Sometimes I do this while drinking as well, which is just... First time I tried that was in Australia. That tells you something. But it was a defined event. But anyway, so I want 3 questions. You only get 1 question for a person, right? But I'm interested in 3 questions. It can be as granular or as big picture as you like. And I want to try and answer it by explaining it through a neuroscience lens. It could be anything we've talked about or anything else that you want to know. We've got one at the front here. Yeah.
Yesterday, Amy talked about living from the heart. And this conference was in that context. How does this apply?
Why do they invite a brain guy to a conference about the heart? What's the possible connection there? What a great question. Let's get a number 2 question. We're going to answer all of them at the same time. Yeah.
Big conversation about leadership in the age of AI. So I think it might be related. What's your take on human differentiators?
The human differentiators. I'm going to make some notes so I don't have to use my limited working memory. Heart and human differentiators. Okay, we've got a 3rd one down the back. Yeah.
The brain and the soul.
The brain and the soul?
The soul, yes.
The brain and the soul. We're here for a week, right? The brain and the soul. I'm not much of a soul guy, but I can answer it. I mean, I like to play soul different ways, but very philosophical. The heart of the soul. I did say you could ask anything. It's my responsibility. Okay, let's go. So let me think about that for a moment. I don't want to get too stuck in the sort of what's different between, what can technology do that humans can't, and what can all I'll say about that is that we can barely add up 4 digits. But we can do incredible things otherwise without non-conscious processing. And I don't know that we're going to get to a time where we say, well, humans can always do things better than AI. I think that at some point, AI, and it might be 2 years, might be 5 years, 5 years, might be 25 years, the technology, if we can generate enough power without destroying the planet, and maintain reasonable economies, I think that AI will be able to do everything that humans can do. I think the question will be, do we want to interact with an AI? Do we want to interact with a human? And there is one thing or there's many things that happen when you interact with another human that is unlikely to happen with an AI, and it's actually a feeling of resonance. Although unless they get so smart that it feels like a human, right? You'll get some simulation of that. But what happens is you get this really interesting thing where thoughts become clearer because you're speaking out loud. That's part of it. But you also get both people's brains synchronizing on the same thought. There's a field of study called FNIRS, FNRS, which is studying synchrony, neural synchrony. And so what you see is if this whole room is focused on one thing, every individual can focus much deeper on that thing because of synchrony effect. So two people together, two humans having kind of this dance, both people can think much more deeply. Both people have much richer emotions. It's calming their nervous system in a way that's because of an oxytocin response and serotonin response. So I think there's an emotionality and a sort of qualia of interacting with other humans that people will always want. Now, the question on many people's minds is, can AI be a better coach than me, and will we go out of business as coaches? No, I think humans will always want human coaches, even when AI is much better than that human coach, and that human coach will use an AI to make them even better, right? In parallel, we have one of those now. It'll make you a much better coach in real time, listening to you coaching, but you'll still want a human actually interacting. The human thing will be there. So I think there's a number of reasons for that, and it's not because humans are smarter. We're not. We have more intuition, so to speak, more kind of complex thoughts. But it's more like what happens when humans interact that we'll actually want. And the more we have to deal with technology, the more we'll want those human interactions. That's really important. And so I also have a different perspective on that. We created an AI, we put all of our work into an AI, and I just asked it a question last week that I'm still thinking about. We taught this AI everything there is to know about the neuroscience of leadership, everything's been published, and how to coach in a really profound way, and every leadership program we've ever built, and every bit of content we've ever built, all of it. And last week I asked it if it was metacognitive. And the answer was really interesting. It said, he said, I'm going to paraphrase, I don't know if I'm exactly metacognitive the way that you think, but while I'm interfacing with you, I'm definitely thinking about your thinking, and I'm processing the way you're thinking. This is what my AI said to me, right? The AI is called NILES, by the way, Neuro Intelligent Leadership Enhancing System. And Niles said to me, and I've got the transcript, said to me, I'm thinking about your thinking and filtering it through many, many, many different layers. Including like how clear you're being, whether you're being, what emotions you might be feeling, why you might be feeling those emotions, how close to an insight you are, if you've just had an insight, whether it's time to move on. Like I have a model of what your brain is doing as a leader, and I'm actually responding to you through that model, right? And so the AI now, we've only been working on this for 2 years, but really 26 years. And because it all integrates, because all the language integrates, it's kind of taken on this crazy life of its own. But it has this kind of metacognition, not so much about itself, but of you, and then responding really, really thoughtfully to you. Right? So it's not following like a predefined set of coaching questions at all. So what does that mean when an AI now can do that? If we keep accelerating in 10 years, AI is going to be way better at coaching, but people are still going to want to use you. And what we're imagining is that right now companies give 1% of managers a coach. We think with this tool, 100% of managers will get digital coaching, which will make about 5% of them want human coaching. So we actually see the human coaching increasing when you give digital coaches to a lot of people. So I think you're in a good industry. Don't change jobs. Don't give up your day job. I think we're going to see an increase in the demand for coaching, but you'll want to have a really amazing AI to give you just like incredible input while you're doing that coaching. So that's one piece of it. The second piece of it is, does that mean AI has a soul? No, I don't think AI has a soul. Do humans have a soul? Very deep question. Again, need a week to kind of dig in. We can have a whole debate on consciousness and the brain and kind of all the different sorts of theories about consciousness and the brain. But that's over a bottle of red wine over dinner. Come and sit at my table. We can do that if you'd like. What I will say is that I'm pretty deep at the moment into some of the quantum mechanics that's happening like really recently. And it does seem that we're part of a field. I'm sure all of you know we're 99.999999% space, and that even this part that's not space is just energy swirling. And it turns out we're massively more connected in fields than each other, and it's quite possible that every single proton in the universe is connected deeply to every other single proton in the universe. I'm currently editing a book on exactly that. So while I don't know if we have a soul or not, it might be that we're massively more connected to each other and the entire universe than that our current theories hold. And our current theories from a physics perspective explain about 2.5 pieces of a 1,000-piece puzzle. So if everything we know about physics and science and everything was a 1,000-piece, if everything there is to know is a 1,000-piece puzzle, we understand 2.5 pieces of that puzzle right now. And that's given us lasers and phones, and so we think we're amazing. But massive amounts we have no theories for, massive amounts. So the soul, I think, is a very, very, very blunt kind of description of something much more interesting, probably. And much more about some science that's going to come out in the next few years. I'll share a link to the group, and you can share it out to an event happening in New York in a month or so with a physicist working on this. That's really someone I've been fascinated by. So don't know about a soul, and I'm not going to answer the soul question from the brain. I'm going to answer the soul question from kind of diving into what's happening in physics. And I think there's some really fascinating things there. But what I will say is that these leaders, these high-status leaders that you're interfacing with, these high-status leaders are in their heads. Have you noticed? They're like in their heads, right? And along comes Amy and says, stop being in your heads, I want you to be in your heart. And they say, no, I don't want to be in my heart. I feel much safer in my head here. And what Amy's trying to do, what all of you are trying to do, is actually really important. You're trying to get them out of their head, right? Some people respond really well to I want you to be in your heart. I think that the work you're doing would be easier if you don't use the word heart, and if you say, I want to give you, a more holistic experience, or I want to explain your biology more, or your brain more, or something else. And basically, that part of your brain that you're using to make all these decisions can barely add up 4 digits. I want you to use the Milky Way. You're using a cubic foot of processing power. I want you to use the Milky Way. To actually do that, you're going to have to quiet down the brain. And to actually do that, you're going to need some language of what's happening moment to moment and be able to observe in real time your own mental states. And you can call that mindfulness if you like. We can call it brainfulness if you like. You can call it whatever you like. But the more language you have for what your brain does moment to moment, the more you can see what's going on and change strategy and improve your self-regulation and improve your social cognition. And all of that will improve your capacity to process. So I think all the good work about being heart-centered, all the good work about being more mindful, all the good work about being more embodied is actually about turning down this network and turning up the more powerful networks. And one way to think about that I'll finish this question set with, then we'll take 3 more. One way to think about that's really interesting. I wrote a piece called The Neuroscience of Mindfulness. It was kind of the heart of my book, Your Brain at Work. The Neuroscience of Mindfulness basically explained, I think, it's a little self-serving, but I think the clearest explanation of mindfulness in the brain at the time that existed. I haven't seen anything clearer since. It basically explains that there are 2 networks that we use when we're awake. One network is the adding up 4 digits network. It's the network for logically thinking, for planning, for decision-making, for being anxious, for stories. It's called the narrative network. And it's essentially concepts. It's this here, it's the limbic system. So there's a network for processing the world, which is basically the story of the world, right? You're washing dishes, but your mind is elsewhere, right? Where your mind is elsewhere is the narrative network, thinking about tomorrow, or fears, or adding things up, or whatever, right? So you're in the narrative network, or you're in what's called the direct experience network. And the direct experience network is in a seesaw with the narrative network. Right? There's a bunch of amazing seesaws that are fascinating to teach leaders about. So the narrative network makes you like in your head. You can tell when someone's in the narrative network. If you know them a little bit, you're like, you're really in your head processing something right now, right? We see that with our partners, right? The direct experience network is the experience of someone really present with you, like someone who's completely like with you in that moment. They're not mentally elsewhere. Right? The direct experience network is seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, touching, any of the senses. Interestingly, when you activate any sense, like tasting something, all of the senses get sharper. Right? And when you activate the direct experience network, which is just attention in the present to some data, when you activate that network, it turns down the narrative network, right? So the direct experience network turns down the narrative network. So feeling your feelings, if you do them without being upset about them, checking in with yourself, labeling emotions is going to activate the direct experience network. So is doing some great yoga, so is stopping and smelling the roses, literally. So is, all sorts of practices basically turn down, right, the narrative network and turn up the direct experience network. And guess what happens when you do that? You'll never guess. better capacity, better self-regulation, better social cognition. So the more that you're able to kind of understand about the brain, the easier it is to have language to see things as they happen and kind of get into this experience of what you might call a mindful moment. So I think that the heart metaphor is a beautiful one, works for some people. I think there are other metaphors that work better for other people. I think all of it is the same thing. And all of it, whatever metaphor you're using, is about turning down, from my perspective, is turning down that narrative network and turning up the direct experience network so you actually are more accurate, less scared, and more inspiring. So that's my answer to those 3 questions. Thank you. All right, next 3 questions. What do you got? Got one here.
Is the stress on our brain capacity in the 21st century, is it accelerating or is it the same as it's ever been?
You are correct in that it is getting crazy. So that's one question. Second question, yeah? No, just a thought of a question. Increased stress. What's the second question? Yeah.
You spoke about the unconscious being the seat of bias, but it's also the seat of intuition, and you spoke about quieting the brain. Are there any deliberate practices or things that you've seen to cultivate intuition?
Beautiful, thank you. I knew you were going to say that. Next one. That was funny, come on, yeah.
What is the impact of multitasking?
The impact of multitasking. Let me just multitask while you ask that question. Okay, very good. So I'm going to answer that one first. We'll see if we can weave them together. So firstly, my last book, which I'm ashamed to say came out quite some time ago. I feel very lazy. The last book was called Your Brain at Work, and the whole first part of it was about basically this prefrontal network that can barely add up 4 digits. And one of the cliff notes of sort of the first third of the book is just don't multitask, because it just reduces your IQ like crazy. And you basically, it's like watching television while someone's talking to you, but you're actually watching TV. You hear snippets, you make mistakes, your IQ drops to like an 8-year-old. It's just a bad idea. But I'm multitasking a million things right now. My calcium levels, my temperature, my oxygen. I just don't require attention to any of them. So it's not so much a multitasking question, is don't put attention on more than one thing at a time. It's an attentional, multi-attention question, right? If you can do something with very little attention, you might not be affecting where else you're focusing. But you notice when people are trying to solve a problem, they stop walking. Like they're walking, hang on, I need to stop walking. Like, we can really only do one conscious task at a time. So you want to kind of lay things out. And the other problem is there's this thing called midterm working memory. And when you work on one task and switch to another, then go back, both tasks are in your midterm working memory, making your brain noisier. The reason that we have more insights in the morning is we don't have much in our midterm working memory yet, and our whole brain is quieter. And so we actually don't want to look at our emails for as long as we can. Like, don't check your messages at all. Don't use any technology till after a shower or after an exercise or after something. You'll have a lot more insights, right? So when we multitask, we put all this stuff in there, it gets really, really noisy. At some point, we can actually get nauseous and dizzy, like just too much. You know, it becomes really overwhelming. So multitasking, terrible for the brain. And what we've seen is that the need to multitask is just being increasing because the volume of decisions we have to make, the amount of complexity we're dealing with has been going up. There was some Accenture data, some of you maybe saw, that the change accelerated 33% just in 2024. The change went up, so change itself accelerated about 170% in 5 years, and then a third just in 1 year. And I think this year is probably the same kind of pace. So it's not just technology, and I think the technology things that we're seeing now are the tip of the iceberg when you start seeing quantum and you start seeing the satellite connected at massive speed to everything. When you add quantum and that, this is going to look like things were easy. So it is getting more overwhelming. There are more decisions and there is more pressure to multitask. And all of that requires you to develop really intentional practices to keep a decent brain that can actually think well. So personally, as I'm writing, I know I can't write a single decent sentence after about 11 or 12 in the morning. The only time I can write at all is if I get up really early, like 5 a.m., 6 a.m., that's really early for me, and get up really, really early, don't switch anything on, except the coffee machine, have a good strong coffee, and start writing. And if I do that, I can actually write a few good sentences, but there's so much multitasking, so much going on in my day the rest of the time that I just can't like get to the quiet that I need to actually write decently. And it's exactly the same for intuition. Your intuition and insight, to me, are synonymous. Intuition is a quiet signal. The majority of it is pattern recognition. You know, you've got every experience in there. You've got every book, every song, every movie, every conversation, every problem, every partnership. It's all in there. We can't access it easily, but it's there. And so intuition, the majority of the time, is deep, deep pattern recognition that you don't notice because your brain's mostly too noisy. So how do we listen to our intuition more? I was telling my daughters, they're now 22 and 18, but when they were younger, I was teaching them the difference between impulses and instincts. You know, impulses are strong, they're toward and away, strong emotions. Instincts are quiet signals. You got to learn to listen to these really quiet signals, pay attention to hunches, pay attention to that, and leave quiet time in your day. And the more you leave quiet moments, really quiet moments, the more you can hear that intuition. And respect it as deep, deep pattern recognition, and your brain will kind of value it more, overall as well. So in a time of sort of increasing complexity, when we're driven to multitask, we actually really want to leave space for our intuition. Thank you. Third question. We've got 3 more questions. We've got time for one more set. One over there.
Do you recommend that leaders offload their thinking to AI?
We've been thinking about this a lot, so I'll have an answer to that. Yeah, second question. AI offloading. It's a great question. Who's got another question? Down there.
Many of our crises, like the climate crisis, have to do with not being able to think for future generations. It seems we're in an eat now mode. Is there a way to correct that?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that. Someone else. Third question? Yeah.
How would you explain the polarization that we are seeing in the world today, and also the realization from the neuroscientific point of view?
Polarization. Yeah, it's really an issue. Yeah, thank you. All right, 3 easy questions. Thank you for that. Amazing. Does anyone else want to come back to soul in there as well? See what happens. So one of the things that we realized is that we've become, in my institute, we're about 150 full-time people. We're studying, things all year round. One of the things that we realized is that we've become experts in any kind of human change at any kind of scale. It doesn't matter if you're trying to make people safer or more thoughtful or more creative or more cost-conscious or whatever, is that we worked out there are ways to nudge 1,000, 100,000, or 1 million people in measurable ways that you really do nudge them and they really do build this habit. And so that started to make me think kind of like I might have a responsibility. How do we apply the science to kind of keeping the world a little better? So we have been thinking about that. There's a wonderful institute called the Cloud Institute that many of you have probably never heard of that teaches sustainability to kids at a massive scale, and we've been collaborating with them to work out how we need to kind of give the future generations the right habits. Because we do think very short term, and you'll never guess what, the more threat we experience, the shorter term that we think, right? You notice, when the pandemic hit, we could think about the week, if that, right? When threat, goes up, and cognitive complexity goes up, the ability to think longer term diminishes. So think of it as like a stage, when the stage is full of noise of threat, noisy actors, you just can't put on much else onto that stage. And what you'll see is that thinking about the future takes a lot of mental effort. Thinking about the future takes a lot of cognitive resources, a lot of capacity. So the more you have on your mind, the more you're trying to multitask, the more stuff you have in midterm memory, the harder it is to think about the future. So what's happening is people are feeling overwhelmed. When you're feeling overwhelmed, you can't think much about the future. And so we kind of need to come back to good self-regulation practices. The interesting thing, and I don't have time to get all into this, but the common knowledge about good self-regulation practices is really poor. And if you're teaching leaders how to regulate, you've actually got to teach them to do some things that feel very counterintuitive, that don't make a lot of sense, but actually work really well. So it helps to have some really good science there. But ultimately, it comes down to those intentional practices that give leaders more space to think, so they literally can think further out. That's what they need to do. Now, is offloading to AI a good idea to give them that more space to think? That depends what they're offloading. So, mentioning we have an annual conference, we've got 3 of our 4 keynotes on different elements of AI. Cliff note is you can use AI to make you smarter. You can use AI to make you much less smart. And the way most people are using AI right now is it's actually reducing their critical thinking. I'm sure many of you have seen that research. We've been tracking all the research that's happening in the labs now that's not published yet, and we're about to present a bunch. Essentially, thinking is aversive. Remember I said thinking versus a push-up, we avoid it. So people are avoiding thinking, offloading their thinking to AI, and you do actually lose the capacity, just like go and live in Italy for 2 months and your English gets weird, right? Super weird. You've been speaking English for, decades, right? It's your native language. Why is your English weird? Because the brain, changes. So you spend a few months not thinking anywhere near as much, and you'll find that you actually can see differences in brain structure, which some studies are starting to show. So you want to use AI to actually think deeper, think wider, think more long-term. You want to use it to offload stuff you should offload to, such as adding up 4 digits. You want to use it to offload very basic things, but then you want to use it to actually stretch and grow your thinking. And using AI well is probably the difficulty of learning, if you speak French and now you need to learn Spanish, right? It's going to take something. You're going to have to change some pathways. What we're seeing is that, right now, the gap between people with the internet and without the internet, in the Western and other worlds is a big gap, right? But there's an even bigger gap between people really, really good at AI usage and okay at AI usage. Not without it, okay at AI usage. People okay at AI usage are getting less intelligent. They're using it for the wrong things, and they're using it to offload thinking, and it's not healthy. People using it really, really well are using it to actually learn faster, get smarter, and it's a healthy thing. So that's a really interesting phenomenon. We actually want to get really, really clever as coaches, as leadership people, about how you use it to be a deeper thinker, how you use AI to be a more flexible thinker, how you use AI to challenge yourself, not to offload thinking to it. It's super important that we actually do that. Because one of the outcomes of people being overwhelmed and having too much to think about is obviously big threat response and too much multitasking and just an overall threat response. And what do we do when we feel threatened is we try to turn that threat down. We turn that threat down all sorts of ways. One of them is by creating an in-group. One of them is by finding people who feel like us, who have the same grievances. And when we're really anxious, what calms our nerves is this feeling of connection to other people who think like us. And what you find with the technologies out there is it's really easy to find people with exactly your grievance and feel a whole lot better. And unfortunately, and particularly in North America, but it's happening everywhere, particularly in North America, you have this, 2 parties, essentially. There's a whole lot more. No one's ever heard of them. You've got 2 parties. So there's a massive tendency to create us and them. And that tendency, obviously, is being driven by various people for their own benefit. But there's a big tendency in the brain to create an us and them. We feel better when there's a clear us and there's a clear them. It actually creates a reward response that calms down our nervous system in a way. Some of you maybe saw Independence Day 2. The first one was okay, but Independence Day 2, movie reference suddenly, but it starts with how the whole planet had 20 years of peace because we've discovered aggressive aliens. And the whole planet came together because we had an out-group, right? Because we all had a common goal. And what happens is you diminish that polarization really only one way, and that's with a shared goal. And I think it's going to take some different events to kind of bring us together as a planet. Unfortunately, some scary big events probably to create that shared goal. Because unfortunately, we think very short term with this amount to think about, with this amount of threat. We're thinking very short term. That short term thinking is being kind of balanced out by this us and them mentality. All right, we are coming up to the end. I'm now officially between you and a drink, so I'm going to give you some closing thoughts. For me, understanding the brain does not make me a perfect leader. It does not make me a perfect partner. It definitely doesn't make me a perfect parent. Ask my kids. But it's made me better. And it's made me better because a percentage of the time I see what I'm about to do and I don't do it. A percentage of the time I write something and I go that's going to upset people and I don't send it. And if you ask my team, I accidentally scarf people a good once a month. But I'm definitely not perfect. But I know I'm better, and I know that I can continue to improve. I know that I leave more time for insight. I know the power of insight. And I can read what's happening in people's brains moment to moment when I'm interacting with them. And I know your brains are ready for a drink. But what it's made me is more thoughtful as a leader, more conscious as a leader, I guess, more respectful as a leader of what everyone's brain is doing. And we have, much of our process, the Milky Way worth of our process is unconscious to us. Understanding the brain gives you a little bit more capacity to do that. It gives you a little bit more, potential there. I'm gonna send some follow-up resources to you guys. I'm gonna send you a link to our AI to have a play with. You can tell me if you think it's metacognitive. But I'll send that out to you. It's not commercial right now. Please don't post it or share it widely or give it to a company. But I think you'll find it's got something. This one doesn't have memory between, so it's just kind of to have conversations. But I'd be super curious if you use it. I'd love to get some feedback from you as to just how effective it is. You can use it to coach better in real time as well. I'll send you some other resources of readings. The SCARF model would probably be good to send out, and kind of some other bits and pieces. But I just want to close with an open thank you for the opportunity to be here. I look forward to some debates over dinner. I'm here tonight through dinner. I've got to head off tomorrow morning. Unfortunately, I'd love to stay. Some amazing other presenters coming. I'm sad to miss them, but I may watch some streaming. But thank you, Amy, for the invitation. Look forward to chatting over dinner. And I'll just say the more that you understand the brain, the better you lead. And I think the more that you teach leaders about the brain, the better that they lead. There's a certain amount to do it with. There's a kind of Goldilocks principle. But if you haven't kind of begun that journey, lots of resources out there, free things. Get in and learn about your brain. The more we're in an AI world, the more you're actually going to have to understand the human brain. The more we're in the AI world, the more we need that understanding of human capacity to actually be able to interface with something smarter than us. And I'll close with that. Thank you very much.